this chair in your way?
Why don't you sit right over there?
Want this out of your way?
Yeah, you can just sit right there and look this direction. Perfect, perfect, absolutely perfect, right there. It's recorded.
Want me to go?
Yep. Just like you were telling me.
I found this magazine about World War II stories, and I thought it might be interesting for my old friend Don Bartlett because there's an article in here about a ship that I was on in World War II that was sunk on Thanksgiving Day in 1943. This is the escort carrier USS Liscome Bay. She didn't have a very long life, 3 months from the time we left the States until she's sunk by a Japanese submarine on early in the morning, still dark, Thanksgiving Day. Ship went down in 23 minutes, the loss of 600 plus lives. 256 of us got off. Here's a picture of a shipmate that was killed. His name was Dory Miller. He enjoyed some fame on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, in that he was a mess cook on a battle wagon. The gunner on a 50 caliber machine gun was killed. Nobody seems to know how Dory knew how to operate this machine gun, but he took it over and shot down at least one Japanese plane. As a result of that, Dory got the Navy Cross, and he rightfully should have got the Medal of Honor. Anyway, he was killed on the Liscome Bay. Tragic loss, among others. There are basically 3 pictures exist of the Liscome Bay. The one transporting planes to Alameda for repair. One where she left the ways at Vancouver, Washington when it was built. And another taken from a photographer on the USS Mississippi of the Liscome Bay exploding. This is a photograph of the USS Hughes, a destroyer, which was an escort to the Liscome Bay. And when we were sunk, all battle plans called for ships to disperse the area. They didn't want to lose another one to the same sub. But then they returned and put over motor whaleboats to pick up the survivors that were floating in the water. I was brought back from Macon Island to Pearl Harbor on the USS Leonard Wood, which was a transport / hospital ship for the soldiers that were wounded in the taking of the Macon Island. 2 men from the Liscome Bay died after we were put aboard this hospital transport ship. This is a photograph of the burial at sea of 2 of these were burned so badly, wounded so badly that they died. In this photograph, the sick bay that I was in was just out of the picture, and when I knew that they were going to bury these fellows, I got up out of my bed and went and stood in the hatchway and watched them get their last rites. This basically concludes my narration of what took place in this magazine.
I'll be back in a second.
I feel it's interesting, and not only interesting but fitting that some magazines and so forth are digging up these old stories of World War II. Could provide a object lesson for our youngsters. That's what I would hope to accomplish out of this. Thank y'all kindly. Come back now, you hear?
And spell your last name for us, and then tell me how you got in the Navy.
My name is KJ Harris, Harris. I was a farm boy in West Texas, and I begged my folks to sign for me to go in the Navy. I always wanted to go to the Navy. I never had seen the ocean, so I hadn't even seen a mountain. So I wanted to travel and see stuff. So they wouldn't sign for me to go in until finally I had reached 18 years old. Went to Lubbock, Texas, got on a train with a bunch of other guys, headed for San Diego to boot camp. And this was the first part of 1943. When we got to San Diego, they didn't have room for us, didn't have a barracks ready. So for 2+ days, we just hung out in our street clothes, got dirty, disappointed, and then finally put us in the barracks, and then hell broke loose for a full 6 weeks of shots and close order drill. At that time, they gave everybody an aptitude test, and this would show if you had an aptitude for something, which might lead to bigger and better things. Well, if you take a farm boy off a tractor in West Texas, he didn't have an aptitude for a hell of a lot of things, except maybe mechanics. Long story short, I was sent to Hollister, California, and was assigned to Squadron VC-39. VC being heavier than air composite, 36 planes in a squadron composed of SBD dive bombers, TBM torpedo bombers, and at that time FM Wildcat fighters. We trained there, and that's where I started training to be an aviation machinist mate, plane captain, equivalent of which would be a crew chief or plane engineer in the Air Force, I guess. We went from Hollister to El Centro, California, and this was in July, as I recall. Extremely hot. We went there for night flying because we couldn't touch an airplane during the daytime. From El Centro, we went to just outside San Diego to Otay Mesa, which was a Navy auxiliary air station. What was taking place was the ship that we eventually went aboard, the USS Liscome Bay, was up in out of Seattle, Bremerton, etc., doing sea trials because it had been built in April. Finally, in around the end of September, the Liscome Bay arrived at San Diego. The squadron I was in went aboard. It was an awe-inspiring sight to a young sailor to see this, what looked like a huge piece of metal, and that's going to be my home for how long I didn't know. Anyway, we get aboard the next day, go to sea. Many guys are seasick. I was very fortunate, and all the time I was in the Navy, I never experienced seasickness. I'd get woozy at times, but never sick. Very fortunate. At any rate, we went to sea a couple of times out of San Diego for operations. The squadron was new. The pilots had never flown on or off aircraft carriers. And a Jeep carrier is a very small thing, especially if in rough seas. They bob around like a cork, very rough on all of the equipment and the people too. So finally we left the San Diego waters, went to Hawaii, spent a couple of 3 days in Pearl Harbor, and went to sea for a couple of days, back into Pearl, and finally departed Pearl for we were not told where until many days later. On the way to the Gilbert Islands, which the two main islands in the Gilberts are Tarawa and Macon. We were with two other carriers, Jeep carriers, and our assignment was at Macon Island, which is 90 miles from Tarawa. The Marines took Tarawa, a division of Army took Macon Island. While there, our ship, all the planes were in support of the landing on Macon Island. And on the fourth day, the island was secured. The night before, I went to bed. You work long hours when you're in a combat situation. Night before, I went to bed feeling good in that we had, scuttlebutt had told us that the island was about secured. But I heard destroyers dropping depth charges, which obviously meant there was a submarine in the area somewhere. And I remember thinking, I hope they get the son of a bitch. The next morning, on a ship, when you're in a combat zone, the log will show that they blow reveille, but on an aircraft carrier during a combat operation, they blow flight quarters, which means that all the air department people get up and they've got their job to do to get the planes ready. The ordnance men bomb the planes up, put the bombs and load the guns. Plane captains see that the planes are fueled and ready to go. And probably 30 minutes later, they blow general quarters and reveille. At any rate, I was standing alongside the flight deck on a catwalk, and it was a beautiful moonlit morning, going to be. And I remember standing looking out to sea and thinking how beautiful and tranquil this is, having and knowing what had just taken place on this island a few miles off us. There was a loud explosion, seemed like just under me, a large flash of light, and sometime later, I came to. This explosion had caused me to lose consciousness. fire was raging everywhere. A shipmate of mine, a bosun's mate for the flight deck, had a little compartment right by where I was. I opened the door to tell them to get out of there or to help them. It was obvious there was nobody left in there. Everything was fire, fire, fire. Loud explosions going off. A piece of, shrapnel was flying. I thought I would go inside the island, which was not too far from me, and get away from some of this pieces of airplane, metal, whatever was flying all over. I started to walk to the hatch going into the island. I stepped on some hot metal, and that's when I realized that my shoes had been blown off. The ship had started to list by this time. I was on the starboard side, and the ship listed to the starboard. A friend of mine from Lubbock, Texas, came by. His name was McDonald. I told him that we had to get off the ship. And he says, well, they haven't said abandon ship yet. And I said, look around, Mac. They can't. This thing is going down. I cut a line, threw it over the side, and I said, I'm going down, follow me down. I went down the line, got into the water. Evidently, Mac never followed me. I never saw him again. I started swimming to get away from the ship because you always have from stories you've heard, you have this fear of a ship going down and sucking you under as it goes down. I swam, the water was on fire from all the oil and gas. So you'd swim a ways, splash water, swim some more, try to dive under. I had a life jacket on, which at that time were the old K-Pock filled life jackets. And very cumbersome, hard to swim in. But I swam until I was extremely tired, and I stopped to rest. And I look around, and the ship is right above me. It's drifting the same way that I'm trying to swim. So I thought, well, I still got to try to get away. So I started swimming toward the bow, hoping to get around the bow and let the thing drift away from me. So back into the burning water again. But thank God I made headway toward the bow and was able to get around the bow and get out of the burning water. And the ship began to go farther and farther away. I was probably 200 yards off the ship when it tipped up and went under. Almost immediately there was a horrendous explosion from the ship, and a lot of men I was damaged, and a lot of men probably were damaged by this terrible explosion that took place. Perhaps the boiler's blowing up, I don't know. Anyway, by the way, this was Thanksgiving Day that we were hit. There were turkeys floating in the water that were to have been our Thanksgiving dinner, along with other foodstuffs. The flight deck on a carrier back in those days was covered with oak planking, 3 inches thick and I think 4 inches wide. A lot of this planking was floating in the water. I remember thinking, you don't know how long this Kapok life jacket will last with all the oil and gas on it. So I started gathering up larger pieces of plank from the flight deck. A shipmate was in the water near me, screaming loudly for help, and I swam closer to him and I told him, just relax, help will come, they'll be back, they won't leave us here. And I said, come on, let's gather up some more of these plank. And we did, and put the planks between us and held hands across these planks. We were very fortunate in that the sea was not so rough. It was rough enough that occasionally a wave would break over us, and with all the gasoline and oil in the water, our eyes burned very much, and where we had been wounded, either from burns or shrapnel or whatever, the salt water and the gasoline was very painful. I learned later that the destroyers escorting us, as soon as we were hit, the battle plan was everybody disperses. So they left the area, but later were ordered back into the area, and they put over motor whaleboats to start picking up survivors. The motor whaleboat that picked me up, then we went on picking up other guys, some of whom were hurt a lot worse than me, especially the ones that were badly burned. And when you'd pull them into the boat, not good. The boat that picked me up was from the destroyer Hughes. They had put nets over the side for us to climb aboard the destroyer. I found that I couldn't climb the net. I was too tired, and most of us were. But with help, we finally got aboard. Every man, if he had clothes on, was covered with diesel fuel, gasoline, from head to foot. On small ships, and even some of the larger ones, when you've been at sea a long time, you had to shower in salt water. There just wasn't enough fresh water to go around. We started trying to clean up with, as well as we could, with saltwater soap and salt water. And some of us who were wounded pretty badly were taken below into the cruise quarters. And a destroyer, being a small ship, the ranking medic on the ship was a first-class hospitalman or corpsman. They did the best they could with giving first aid to us. The crew on there insisted that we lay in their bunks, clean white sheets. Most of us didn't want to, but we didn't have much choice. Over on the Macon Island was a ship, the USS Leonard Wood, which had brought a lot of the soldiers to Macon for the battle. They were also equipped to handle a lot of wounded. We from the Liscome Bay survivors were put aboard the Leonard Wood. Most of us went into sick bay along with the soldiers off of Macon Island. Some things are ironic, and tragedy sometimes can turn into a funny. As a result of that underwater explosion, when the ship went down, I had received some internal injuries from the force of the water and was bleeding from the rectum. A young doctor examined me, felt my distended stomach, and said, "Well, son, you'll either make it or you won't." That bothered me a little bit at the time, but it's obvious that I made it. So he was half right. Anyway, we left that afternoon to go to Pearl Harbor, which eventually took us 9 days. During that part of the war, the military was extremely careful to not announce a ship sinking until folks had been notified. Halfway to, I guess about the 4th or 5th day, we're only halfway to Pearl, came over the radio that the United States Navy had announced the sinking of the USS Liscome Bay. Very, very troubling. There's no way we can notify our folks, and that bothers me to this day. We eventually made it to Pearl. I still had no shoes, by the way. There was no place to get any. When we went down on the dock, the ones that could walk, etc., band was playing, flags waving. And everybody is worried about their families. So we were visited by Red Cross representatives. They took our names, addresses, said, "Stop worrying, we'll send a telegram to your families." Mine never received any telegram. And it was another 15 to 20 days before I got to San Francisco, called a sister in Texas, and they didn't know if I'd been was dead or alive for all that time. Just another one of the ironies of a war that some get caught up in. Anyway, I went to Alameda, California. Issued a new sea bag of gear, clothing, etc. Got a 30-day survivor's leave. Went back to Texas to see friends, girlfriends, go quail hunting.